Hello, good evening, and welcome to another live broadcast from TeenPact Network News. We are right here in Richmond, Virginia at our TPN headquarters, and we're bringing you stories of changed lives who are changing the world. Here to keep you up to date tonight, I am Toby Forehand.
And I'm Truman Forehand. Last night, we had the privilege of bringing you the Representative Open Forum as well as the Vice Presidential Debate. And we'd like to thank you once again for tuning in this evening as we continue our elections process with the Senatorial Open Forum and our Presidential Debate.
It should go without saying that tonight's proceedings will have a profound effect on who votes for who in the general election. We have a tremendous list of candidates, and we're excited for everything that's about to happen.
Immediately following tonight's debate, the polls will open for the general election, and those polls will remain open until 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time on Wednesday night. We want to remind all of tonight's viewers of your importance as the voter. So be sure to vote, engage with the process. You hold immense power in determining who represents the TeenPact student body.
Yes, definitely. As we always say here at TeenPact Network News, it is your vote and your voice. So make sure your voice is heard. Remember to stay engaged with the process.
But first, we'll be hearing, of course, from our candidates. Similarly to last night, each candidate will receive 3 minutes in which to state their case for why they should be elected as TeenPact Senator. As up first, we have the Senatorial Open Forums.
As Truman just said, we will be beginning with our Senatorial Open Forum. And first, we'll be hearing from the candidates from the Perseverance Party, before moving on to the candidates from the Compassion Party. And then lastly, we'll hear from the senatorial candidates from the Vision Party. So starting with our Perseverance Party candidates, which are as follows: Claire Blassingame, Sarah Body, David Gause, and Elise Hove. We will begin with Claire Blassingame.
Thank you, Toby and Truman. I'm so glad to be here. Once again, my name is Claire Blassingame. And the reason that I'm here is simply to talk about what God is teaching me. And what he has been teaching me is that this life is only about him. And when I was deciding to run, the only reason that I did is simply because God was telling me, Claire, why not? Why wouldn't you run? Why wouldn't you step on this platform, step up and talk about me? I was reading in Matthew 5, and in Matthew 5, it talks about how a city set on a hill, it can't be hidden. And I thought, well, as believers, we should be salt and light, and we should be set on a hill so we can be heard, so we can be seen. And what we need to be talking about is Christ. So that's why I'm here. And along with that, the reminder that I'm running with is that you are not your own, that you belong to God. You have been bought with a price, and we are not to waste that price. We are his servants, and so everything we do should be for him and not for us. That truth is freeing because we don't have to live for ourselves anymore. We can wake up in the morning and we don't have to say, what can I get out of this day for me? We wake up and we can say, what can I do to live for God? And so the things of the world won't carry that weight anymore. And our joy doesn't have to be circumstantial. And our well-being doesn't have to determine how we are emotionally. But the only thing that matters is Christ and how we can please him. And he is the giver of every single gift that we have. So we are entitled to anything. And that's a hard lesson to learn, because when we get things taken away, we think, well, I deserve that and I needed that. But God is our good shepherd, and he knows what we need. He knows what we need. And so when we get those things taken away, who are we to say, God, I needed that? But through that, he's just been teaching me that we are not our own and we don't get to say what we need. But I just wanted to remind all of you of this, and that is why I'm running. So I hope that it encourages you and it frees you to just simply live for him and not yourself. Thank you so much, and good luck to the rest of the candidates. Once again, I'm Claire Blassingame.
Thank you so much, Ms. Blassingame. We will now be hearing from Ms. Body.
Hello, TeenPact Nation. My name is Sarah Body, and I'm from Columbus, Ohio. TeenPact has been an enormous part of my life for the past 4 years. I can confidently say that I would not be the person I am without the work that the Lord has done through this incredible organization. Now, I'm running for Senate because it would be an absolute honor to represent you guys as a TeenPact Nation, because it does mean so much to me. Now, while I do not believe that messages should be the deciding factor in a candidate, the Lord has placed something on my heart with which I would love to share with you through this unique platform. Over the past year, I have thought a lot about discomfort. and specifically what the natural human response is to situations in which we might feel anxiety or uncertainty or stress. Now, what I found, especially in this worldwide pandemic we are experiencing, is that people tend to have a very self-centered mindset. Why has this happened to me? Why my generation? Why did my summer study abroad camp get canceled? Or why did my graduation not take place? You know, this is easily the response we fall into as selfish human beings. But I think that as Christians, we are called to step out of this selfishness. But how do we do that? Well, I really think that there are 3 tangible ways which we as Christians can step out of this selfishness. The first is to remember the Lord's faithfulness. The Lord has been faithful to his people time and time again. We see that both in the Old and New Testaments and in life today. We see how he was faithful to the Israelites, and we see how he was faithful to the TeenPact Strong campaign, where we raised $400,000 within a month. The Lord has always been faithful, so why would he stop now? Secondly, we must remember that the Spirit of the Lord is not one of cowardice, but one of power. And this is something that Paul reminds us of in 2 Timothy 1:7. Asking why me with a spirit of cowardice, of self-centered fixation, is not what we are called to do as Christians, but we are called to step into these situations empowered in our faith, which brings me to my third point, where we are supposed to praise the name of the Lord in these situations. Combining the idea that the Lord is completely faithful and we as the people are completely dependent on him, we are called as Christians to praise his name in the middle of these situations. We are called to thank him for the healing we know is going to take place, even when we don't foresee that as a possibility. We have not only the privilege, but the responsibility to praise the Lord's name for the goodness we know is going to take place. So I urge you all not to encounter these situations with a spirit of cowardice, but rather with a spirit of power. Thank you. That's all from me.
Thank you so much, Ms. Body. Now we'll be hearing from David Gause.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is David Gause, and I've actually been involved in TeenPact national elections in past years, but in particular last year when I ran for TeenPact national representative. I've enjoyed the national elections process very much so, and this is one of the main reasons why I am running for TeenPact senator this year. Another main reason why I am running for senator is that I have a challenge that I am passionate about and a challenge I would like to pose to you. And this is the challenge and message of different. There was a time in my life when I was lonely, scared, and purposeless. It was like I was black and white, and this black and white came from my sin, and there was nothing I could do to change this about myself. But everything changed when I met Jesus. Starting with my heart, I began to transform into color. I began to realize the hope I have in Jesus. My loneliness diminished, my fear withered, and I now have a huge purpose. I have been chosen by God to spread his hope and his color, his glory to the ends of the earth. And God has given me everything to do so. I have the Bible, which is my direction booklet, that I can use and hand out to other new painters, people who are going to spread God's hope and love. I have the Holy Spirit to lead me, and he is my art instructor. And I have the gospel, the life-changing color I have to spread to the world. I will never give up, and nor will Jesus. I am truly different. The question and challenge I would like to pose to you, TeenPact Nation, is, are you? Once again, my name is David Gause, and I am so excited to be running for senator this year at National Convention 2020. Thank you guys for listening, and that's all from me.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gause. Up next, we will be hearing from Miss Elise Hove.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elise Hove, and I'm running with the message Pursue. During this seemingly dull time in our lives, it's so easy to overlook the meaningfulness of life. There is a plague of spiritual apathy going around, and none of us are immune. We're all very good at the easy parts of faith. We go to church on Sundays, we pray before meals, we have the Bible app on our phone, or maybe you even put in a Bible verse in your Instagram bio. But when we truly look at our lives, are we choosing to be comfortable over being right? Do we care more about others approving of our actions than Christ approving of our heart? Do we really hate sin, or do we just hate the penalty for sin? Are we willing to put aside our own entertainment in order to obey Christ? Apathy is present when we take comfort in carelessness. Revelation 3:16 says, "Because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I'm about to spit you out of my mouth." This is the risk we take when we choose to be apathetic and indifferent in our faith. Now more than ever, we are at risk to becoming lukewarm believers, but Christ calls us to so much more than that. Don't waste the waiting by overlooking ways to submit to his will. His plan for us goes beyond our own selfish ambitions. God calls us to pursue him through a lifestyle of action and faith. But in order to do this, we must first change our mindset from I can do all things that I find comfortable through me who strengthens myself to I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Our desires, our success, our pleasure cannot venture beyond the foot of the cross. Our attitudes of apathy only take us in circles. But when we pursue Christ, the place in our lives that we filled with comfort will be replaced with faith. When we pursue Christ and we set our eyes on him, we will experience joy and fulfillment far beyond anything our false comforts could ever provide. When we seek him, we will find satisfaction in him. It's easy to look at the current circumstances around us and feel like we're held back, like there's a roadblock in the path to righteousness. But God's plan never takes a leave of absence, no matter how much we feel the world spiraling around us. Even during this crisis, Christ calls us to pursue him. We will never grow if we just live life. It takes active pursuit and attentiveness. This is the message of Pursue that I'm running with. Ultimately, you should vote for someone that you believe embodies what it means to be a TeenPacter and will represent Christ with excellence. As an elected official, those are the goals that I will strive to achieve. Thank you. My name is Elise Hof.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hof, and to all of our senatorial candidates from the Perseverance Party. Up next, we will be hearing from the senatorial nominees of the Compassion Party. Those candidates are as follows: Kedron Burke, Elizabeth Savoy, Kasumi Sonoda, and Caitlin Wilson. We will begin with Kedron Burke.
What's up, TeenPact Nation? I would just like to start by saying thank you to everyone who is joining us on our live stream in your living rooms and kitchens and bedrooms. We are all so grateful that you could join us tonight. Like Toby said, I am Kedron Burke, and I've had the privilege of running for senator alongside these amazing candidates. I am from the central state of Oklahoma. Shout out to all my Okies out there. And I have had the privilege of being involved in TeenPact since I was 8 years old. And if any of you follow my senator Instagram account, you all can testify to my TeenPact glow up. As I've told many of you, this year I felt called to run on a mission instead of a message. And you may be asking, well, Kedron, what does that exactly mean? Hearing candidates' messages is one of my favorite parts of TeenPact elections, but I feel that ultimately it is the role of representatives and senators to carry out the mission and vision of the presidential administration, whether that be the Ferguson-Freeland administration with their CREATE initiative, the DeLogos-Glisson administration with their elected officials communication program, or the Myers-Patterson administration with their Rooted devotional book. Earlier this year, I was granted with the opportunity to be on this staff team, but unfortunately, because of my crazy spring schedule, I was unable to accept. One of the reasons I'm running for TeenPact Senator is because I want to be involved in TeenPact as much as I can. Most people view TeenPact as a couple weeks out of the year where you get to go to this amazing camp and grow your relationship with the Lord and with your TeenPact friends. But I view TeenPact as a 365-day-a-year organization, ministry, and community. With my family being so involved in TeenPact, I've had the amazing opportunity to host TeenPacters traveling through my state, to be able to be a TeenPact Uber driver with my mom, to help host and set up for different TeenPact events for all the Oklahoma students. And I've done my fair share of TeenPact promos to co-ops, churches, and youth groups across my state. I would love the opportunity to carry out these same responsibilities as your senator. I've enjoyed this process so much and have loved getting to meet and interact with all of you over social media. I believe this is such a unique time in our world, and I think that TeenPact has embraced every aspect of this whole quarantine and coronavirus. Thank you so much to all of the people that have supported and encouraged me through this whole process, and thank you to all of you guys for staying involved, even though it's online this year. I would be so honored to be a TeenPact Senator. Thank you. Once again, my name is Kedron Burke, and I would so appreciate your vote. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Burke. Up next, we will be hearing from Ms. Savoy. Unfortunately, Ms. Savoy is experiencing technical difficulties, so for right now, we will actually go ahead and move to hearing from Ms. Sonoda. Ms. Sonoda?
Thank you, Truman. Well, hi guys, my name is Kasumi Sonoda, and I'm coming at you here from Houston, Texas. Now, this election cycle certainly has been special, but it has been a complete honor and joy to get to be a part of this whole process as a candidate. So I'm very, very thankful for that. Now, the coming TeenPact year is also going to be very special and unprecedented just because of the way that things are. So I would like to get to use the opportunity, the office of the Senate to promote a strong social network among the TeenPact Nation to allow for better communication and integration of our skills, gifts, and talents, because I believe that these things are going to be crucial for confronting the unique challenges that are placed before the Ministry of TeenPact because of the current world situation. But that's just kind of my vision for Senate. But I want to take the next couple of minutes to talk about the message of multiplied, which is very near and dear to my heart. It essentially encapsulates the idea that we don't have a lot to give, but when we put our little bit in Jesus Christ's hands, it's multiplied beyond anything we could ever ask for or imagine. In John chapter 6, we hear the story where Jesus has 5,000 hungry Galileans on his hands. And of course, he wants to feed them because he's Jesus. So he sends out the 12 disciples to go look for food, but all they can find is a small boy with a small lunch. And they bring this little boy to Jesus. And in verse 9, the discouragement is evident in their voices as they say this. They say, "Here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will they go among so many?" I mean, how far indeed, right? You and I both know the story that little bit in Jesus' hand was multiplied far beyond what was needed. And this story resonates with me because just like that little boy, I'm never going to have enough. I'm never going to add up. And neither will you, not even close. But the good news is that Jesus never asked us to add up. He knows exactly how much we have, and he knows it's not enough. What he asks us to do is to give him the little bit that we have, whatever it is, and watch as he multiplies it to do incredible things. So I don't know what you're called to do. Maybe you're called to start a Bible study, maybe to apply to staff with TeenPact, or maybe just to forgive someone, and it all just seems too hard. And the truth is that it is too hard if you were alone. I've tested this and come to find this blatant realization over and over in my own life. But the thing is that we're not alone. And so I hope that encourages you today to dream again about doing big things for the Lord, and then let it compel you to step out and trust him with those things, and trust him with your little bit, and watch as he uses your little seed or whatever you have to feed this world that so desperately needs it. I mean, he's dreaming with us, and he's so ready to multiply it. And that's my message. Thank you so much for your time. Again, my name is Kasumi Sonoda.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sonoda. At this time, we will now be hearing from Ms. Savoy.
Hello, TeenPact Nation. My name is Elizabeth Savoy, and it is my privilege to be sitting here before you all, even if digitally, to run for TeenPact Senator. To be real with y'all for a second, this is not something I ever saw myself doing. I actually signed up to run 2 minutes before the time ran out, despite the fact that I've been involved with TeenPact for 8 years now, since my first class as a 10-year-old, walking up the steps of the Florida Capitol. I have never felt the calling to run for national student body. But while sitting idly in this quarantine, pining over missed opportunities in this season, I realized that there was a door open in front of me to seize and give back to this community I care so much about. TeenPact is a ministry that teaches people how to grow up and to engage with the world around them and to step outside of our comfort zones, to become the best versions of ourselves that we can be. And how could I call myself a TeenPacter if I didn't have the boldness to take this opportunity before me? It was a very strange last minute thing, but I believe it was the right thing and the right timing for it. My message this year is all about timing. This is something the Lord's been teaching me a lot lately, just how to trust in his timing. We as humans have very whack understandings of time. It's really our own understanding of it is really changeable and untrue. Just think about your first TeenPact week-long class, how it went by in like 2 days versus a finals week, which 2 days of studying feel like forever. We can't trust our own understanding of time. So how can we claim to know when timing is right, which is something we do so often? But our God is an eternal God, and he's beyond our earthly understanding of time. He knows what's best for us, and we have to learn to trust that. It's hard to do, especially right now. We're in a very hard season of life. And it's so easy when we pray to expect immediate answers, but God does answer all our prayers in time, and we need to be patient and trust that. So take some comfort. I want to encourage all to take comfort in the fact that it's not until you come to the other side of difficult situations that you can usually look back and see how the Lord has grown you. And this is something that I've realized just recently, and it's really been laid on my heart. So I just want to encourage you all to look at a time of struggle or a season that was difficult for you, and think of the ways that God grew you through that. And just recall that this time that we are in right now may be a time of struggle, but the timing is not wrong in God's eyes, and he has great plans for us. I hope that this year the timing is right for me to continue to serve TeenPact in any capacity I can. I would truly be delighted to represent you all as a senator and continue to share with people all that I've learned in 8 years in this ministry. But if the timing isn't right, I truly will continue to share my love and respect for this community with everyone I meet. But thank you for listening to what I've had to say. And I hope to stay involved with TeenPact in whatever way I can in the coming years. Once again, my name is Elizabeth Savoy, and I hope that you will vote for me to represent you all as TeenPact Student Body Senator.
Thank you so much, Ms. Savoy. The next candidate that we will be hearing from is Ms. Wilson.
Hi, TeenPact Nation. My name is Caitlin Wilson. And when I was preparing for National Convention this year, I was preparing to attend, and I was adamantly against running for office. I had many reasons, but the most prominent reason I had was I'm usually not the type to step out and run in front of a bunch of people. Usually I like to be in more of a supportive role and be more of a campaign manager type person. However, TeenPact is all about getting you out of your comfort zone. A few weeks ago, someone posted on a group me that I'm part of, the Compassion Party needed more candidates to step up and run. I really didn't want to run, but I felt God telling me that this was the time he wanted me to run. When I decided I was going to run, I knew that I didn't want to run with a message. Now, I don't feel like messages are bad. I think they're an amazing opportunity to share something that's on your heart with the TeenPact Nation. However, I feel that the elections process has become too reliant on messages and which message we think is the best or most relevant to us. I feel like instead we should be choosing candidates based on how well we think they can represent us as a student body. Now, I think I would make a good senator because I enjoy talking to people and trying to help them fix their problems. And I also enjoy being in that supportive role. And I feel like I would make a good senator because I would help to support the president and vice president that get elected. Finally, when you cast your ballots tonight, please don't cast your ballot based on which message you think is the most relevant to you. Instead, please cast your ballot based on who you think can represent you the best. Thank you. My name is Caitlin Wilson.
Thank you, Caitlin, and all of our Compassion Party senatorial nominees. At this time, we will now be moving on to, finally, the Vision Party senatorial nominees, who are as follows: Brock Freeland, Caleb Knapp, Lauren Tate, and Kelsey Tucker. We will begin with Mr. Freeland.
Hello, everyone. Once again, my name is Brock Freeland, and I'm running to be your next TeenPact Student Body Senator so that I can not only represent you well as the body of TeenPact, but that I can represent Christ well through my actions and through my leadership, all while exalting the name of Christ above all else. This year, I'm running with the message of liberated. The fall marked the complete separation of God and man. No longer was the world perfect, but it was now infested with something new and something deadly. That thing was sin. However, this wasn't the end. The word liberated means to be set free from a situation or circumstance where you were previously bound to a binding restriction or imprisonment. Thousands of years later, those saved in Christ have been rescued from that grip of sin once and for all. Because Jesus took death as the ultimate sacrifice for mankind's sin, we have now been liberated from the slavery we were once tied to. Our previous imprisonment now has no hold on us whatsoever. The chains have been broken, and we are now called to higher glory in Christ Jesus. But what does that look like for us? Well, just as a prisoner who is released from captivity does not remain in his imprisonment, we too should not remain in our sins. In 1 Peter 2:9, Peter states, "But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light." Friends, there is nothing for us in our captivity. Our hope lies in the salvation of Jesus through faith alone. Instead of remaining in our sins and previous transgressions, Christ calls us to much, much more. We were created to declare the praises of God, but this means more than just something we should do to check off boxes. No, declaring God's greatness is a singular reason for our very existence. When we praise him, we fulfill our purpose. And when we testify of the Lord's faithfulness in our lives, we fulfill our very liberation. So now the challenge is clear. Having been liberated from sin, we now exist to exalt the Lord. Our purpose here on earth is to declare the glory of God while sharing the gospel of Christ with others. Will you continue to walk in your previous imprisonment, or will you live like you have been liberated? My name is Brock Freeland, and once again, I'm running to be your next TeenPact Student Body Senator. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Mr. Freeland. We will now be hearing from Mr. Knapp.
Hello, y'all. My name is Caleb Knapp, and I am running to be your TeenPact Senator. Now, I have spent a lot of time in my life climbing mountains, whether that's with scouts or with family or with friends. And if there's one thing I have learned from this, it's that you'll never reach the top if you just sit still. You have to go up. We have our own mountaintop. In 2 Peter chapter 1, it talks about how we need to add to our skills so that we are not blind and nearsighted. We have to grow. We have to ascend. Now, I quickly want to touch on something. The reason I ran was not because of a message, but because the Lord has blessed me with certain skills in leadership and communication that I want to use for you, the TeenPact Nation, a nation that is serving God. So, if the only reason you would vote for me is because of my message, I would urge you to vote for someone else. Vote for someone who you think embodies the morals of TeenPact, who is a leader, and who will represent you well. I hope I am that person. Thank y'all so much. Remember to ascend. My name is Caleb Knapp.
Thank you so much, Mr. Knapp. At this time, we will now be hearing from Ms. Tate.
Hey friends, my name is Lauren Tate and my home is the Black Hills of South Dakota. The message that I'm running with is radiant. This culture is starving for something different. And that something different only comes from the creative genius, your God. We were created to be a light. We were created to be radiant. And Psalms 34:5, it simply says, those who look to him are radiant. If we keep our eyes and our hearts focused on the Father, then we can glorify his name to the best of our abilities. We say, Christ be magnified. So let's do just that and be radiant. TeenPact Nation, I encourage you to live a life of radiance, but to do it with intentionality, whether that's going on a walk through your neighborhood or that's going to do errands with your family. Let's be radiant and magnify the Lord's name. Now, really quick, I want everyone at home to go ahead and just grab a pen or a marker, anything close by. Great. Now, all I want you to do is simply draw a cross anywhere on your hand or on your arm. Now, if you really want to get fancy with it, you can draw 3 vertical lines right above the cross. Mine literally looks like this. I'm no artist, and if I can do this, then you can too. That'll be a great reminder for you in the next couple days to make sure that you're living a life of radiance and not trying to muster up your own love, but that you're giving out Christ's love. Also, when you go to the polls later on tonight, if you've forgotten who you're voting for or you're still unsure, you can look down and just remember Lauren Tate for Senate. Thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you so much, Miss Lauren Tate. Now we will be hearing from Miss Kelsey Tucker.
Hello, hello. My name is Kelsey Tucker, and my message is Unwind with the Maker. I invite you to close your eyes and picture this with me. You're on a tropical island with 80-degree weather and a slight breeze. Listen to the wind rustling the leaves of the trees and the waves rolling back and forth on the beach. You're relaxing in a hammock nestled in between two tall palm trees. You look up and all you see is blue skies, not a cloud in sight. You hear people splashing around in the water and laughing. You have a good book in your hands, are listening to chill music, and have no responsibilities. Now, open your eyes. Think of unwinding with your maker like relaxing at a beach in a hammock. Rest with the Lord. Read God's word, worship him, and give him the responsibilities that bog you down. Oftentimes, when we are the busiest, we feel that we don't have time to just sit with the Lord because that would be unproductive. But as a Christian, it is a necessity to unwind with the Maker. Our days are filled with thousands of decisions, checklists, and errands. But when we make an effort to take time and unwind from our busyness, we see that God is still productive regardless of how many things we mark off of our checklist. In doing that, we are serving him. Serving looks like doing things to further his kingdom, and it also means sitting with him in peace. Well, why do we need to unwind with our Maker? Because if not, we will be stressed and always feel like there's not enough time for everything. If you give God the time of day, he will give you more time. Now, I want to share why I'm running. I'm running because I love TeenPact and the mission that the ministry represents. I want to do everything I can to lead, support, and grow the TeenPact ministry. I believe the Lord has equipped me with strong leadership qualities that would serve an administration well. I desire to follow and serve Christ in whatever capacity and according to his will. I'm very energetic, passionate, and conversational. I pursue integrity, practice patience, and enjoy working on a team. I am human, so I make mistakes, but I strive to have humility to learn from my faults and do better. Now, I don't say that out of pride or to be cocky, but I mention that so that you know more about me. After all, you are electing someone you think will represent the TeenPact Nation well as a leader and ultimately strive to exemplify Christ. So you need to know how a candidate leads. To close this out, I just want to thank everyone for listening. I hope that you'll join me in unwinding with the Lord every day. I encourage you to unwind with your Maker because he wants to relieve your stress and love on you. I don't know about you, but someone who relieves my stress is the kind of person I always want to be around. Once again, my name is Kelsey Tucker, and I encourage you to unwind with your Maker.
Thank you so much, Ms. Tucker. That concludes our senatorial open forums. Thank you so much to all of our candidates for participating. As a reminder, you will be able to choose 4 senators to represent the TeenPact Nation, and polls will open as soon as we are done here tonight.
Yes, great job to all of you. I can confidently say that these are some superb senatorial nominees that you guys have the chance to choose from. So to the voters, I know this is not an easy job, but one that you should definitely put a lot of thought into. And to all of our senatorial candidates we just heard from, great job and good luck.
Now we will move on into our presidential debate, the one you have all been waiting for. Last night, we heard about the campaign's plans for international trade and their visions for TeenPact from the vice presidential nominees. Tonight, we continue those discussions with the presidential nominees from the Perseverance Party, the Compassion Party, and the Vision Party.
So with that, please welcome Mr. Jake Myers, Mr. William Ferguson, and Mr. Stephen DeLoglis.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being here tonight. Similar to last night, each of you will have 2 minutes for your opening statement, 90 seconds to answer each subsequent question, and then 2 minutes for a closing statement as well. If any candidate or ticket is mentioned by name in another candidate's answer, that candidate will have a 30-second window to respond to that statement.
We will begin tonight's debate with opening statements from each presidential nominee, and we will start off with Mr. DeLoglis, and we will end with Mr. Ferguson. So, Mr. DeLoglis.
Hey guys, my name is Stephen DeLoglis, and I am so excited to be here with you guys today. Briley and Glisson and I have been having such an amazing time these past 4 months of being able to run this campaign. We've been able to meet so many amazing people and stay in contact with them, and the support all of you have given us has left us completely speechless. Now, a mosaic is a picture created through thousands of pieces of tiles. Each of these tiles is unique, but all of them are broken, shattered, and individual. In fact, when they're by themselves and individual, you may think it was a mistake or an accident, but if they're purposely put together, you'll see that a breathtaking picture can be formed. My friends, a mosaic presents a bigger picture and brings attention to the creativity and unity of the Creator. This unity brings glory to Christ. In fact, in Ephesians 4, verse 3, Paul says to be eager to maintain the spirit of unity in the bond of peace. Friends, do we strive to seek this unity? Do we eagerly seek to join together to magnify our Savior? Mike Yuccanelli said, the power of the church is not a parade of flawless people, but of a flawless Christ who embraces our flaws. The church is not made up of a whole people, but of a broken people who seek wholeness through Christ's brokenness for us. Friends, this brokenness is an amazing testimony, and it's a key element of what makes a mosaic. That the perfect, untouched, unblemished Savior would be willing to reach out his hand and make a beautiful image out of a bunch of shattered people. So friends, this is our purpose. That together, as a mosaic picture of Christ's redeemed lives, we as Christians with one voice cry out, Christ be magnified. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. DeLoglis. We will now be hearing from Mr. Myers.
Mist, vapor, temporary. What if we've had this wrong the whole time? What if we've been chasing a light that is good, but it's not the brightest? In the past 3 months, everything that we counted as definitive in our lives was taken away from us. It was through this situation that the Lord showed Katie and I that we cannot depend on the things of this world. Fill in the blank. This is the call that Katie and I are challenging the TeenPact Nation with. When we rely on TeenPact for spiritual satisfaction, a blank appears the moment we don't have it anymore. We are calling a TeenPact Nation to step away from a foundation that relies on experiences and into a foundation that is eternal, Jesus. When Katie and I first decided to run, at the forefront of our minds, we set foundational visions. If elected, there are two main visions that Katie and I would bring into office. First and foremost is bringing back this idea of team and community. Many of us lost the community aspect of TeenPact this year when events were canceled. But Katie and I wanted to focus our campaign on the simple idea that it isn't just Katie and I. Rather, that the only way this campaign was able to run was because of the amazing community and team we had behind us. Secondly is recognizing the glorification of elections. Katie and I recognized from the very beginning how the entire elections process can often be over-glorified, lifting both the merchandise, the social media, or even the candidates onto pedestals they don't deserve to be on. We want to bring it back to the simple reason we have elections, a representation of the TeenPact Nation. Ask yourself a simple question. Are we dependent on experiences for our spiritual fuel, or are we dependent on the person whose name is Jesus? Fill in your blank. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Myers. And lastly, for opening statements, we will be hearing from Mr. Ferguson. Mr. Ferguson, I believe your microphone is still muted.
Take a second with me to think about a small creature you've probably never heard of. It's a tiny sea larva called a polyp. If you've never heard about these before, don't worry. They're just bugs that live in the sea. They don't jump like dolphins or swim like fish. All they do is make limestone. But that limestone goes to create something that you probably have heard of, coral. It's not only essential to the ocean's health, but it's widely regarded as one of the most beautiful things in the whole world. It's one small bug, but it's one huge purpose. Now let's think about ourselves. It's so easy to sit back and consume all the incredible things the world has to offer, but is that enough for us? I don't think so. If God can give a tiny polyp the power to create something like a coral reef, how much more has he given us gifts that he wants us to use? We're called to be more than consumers. We're called to create. Whether you're an athlete, an artist, a mathematician, whatever, each of those gifts are something that your God has asked you to use well. We are a mirror of his passion and beauty. We're made to create. As Hannah and I have shared this message with you, we've also wanted to give you a practical opportunity to apply it, and we call it the Create Initiative. The Create Initiative is something that will allow you to submit anything you can create to the 2020 elected officials. They will curate your submissions into a regular post on the TeenPact blog that challenges, equips, and encourages the entire nation. We're made to create, and we believe this gives us all an outlet to do so. As much as we felt called to share this message and our executive order, though, we felt just as called to seek to represent each of you well. As you're watching the debate tonight, be prepared to be thinking about what's important to you in an elected official and how each of us fulfill those requirements. We hope you're inspired to create. We hope you feel equipped to do so, and we hope you believe Hannah and I will represent you well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, candidates. We will now be moving into the questions for this evening's presidential debate. For the first question, we will begin with Mr. Myers and end with Mr. Ferguson. These are unprecedented times we are living in, and as Christians, we have a hope to give to the world. However, the ways we do that must change given health and safety concerns. What is the job of the church during such a unique global emergency like we are currently facing, and how do we best accomplish that job? Mr. Myers?
Thank you very much, Truman. That is an excellent question. I believe it can be broken down into many different areas. First and foremost, the job of the church is to love like Christ loved. That's our job as the church, because once again, the church isn't just a building or multiple buildings, but it's everyone coming together. And it's our job to love like Christ loved us, first and foremost. That kind of love will reflect across the entire nation and will shine through such hard times like the ones we are living in. But even beyond that, more practically, my church did something that I really found quite amazing. My pastor got up several weeks ago and said how the state said we could open up our church. But after some time of prayer, he realized that he felt like God said that wasn't best, because it's his job as the pastor, as the leader of that church, to prioritize the congregation. He recognized the issues that are going on, but even beyond that, when they open up, he's pushed so much for people to be grace-filled. Everyone has different opinions. There's no two questions about that. Some people think that we all should be staying at home for months ahead, and some find it okay to go out now. However, it's our job as the church to extend grace, to recognize that everyone will have different opinions. So in the end, I believe, practically speaking, the church must extend grace. But on a more personal level, it's our job as the church to love like Christ loved, because in such a hard time, that will shine out to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. Up next, Mr. DeLoglis.
Absolutely. Jesus said that the greatest commandments for us are to love God and love others. And with that, the commandment of loving others does not stop in a pandemic. In fact, I'd argue that during a pandemic is when this love for others has to increase. The past multiple months has been a season of fear, a season of confusion, a season of uncertainty, and all of these emotions are not emotions of God. As Christians, it's our opportunity, an opportunity like no other, to be able to use this to extend love to others, extend outreach to others, and extend peace and proclaim the name of Christ through this. And although it is important to honor our governing authorities, at times, my church, for example, we have a food pantry and a food bank where we help needy families. And so members of our church during this pandemic have still had to go to work to hand out food and possibly exposing themselves. But while they're exposing themselves, they're still giving them an opportunity to declare themselves through servant leadership and selflessness that the love of Christ is still stronger than the fear of the pandemic. So ultimately, the church needs to serve. And the church needs to love and declare the name of Christ now more than ever in this broken world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. DeLoglis. Next, we will be hearing from Mr. Ferguson.
If you haven't worn a mask in a public setting yet, I've got news for you. It's uncomfortable. If you haven't sat in on a live stream session in an empty church, I've got news for you. It's weird. And in times like these, how do we speak out in fear in a way that is Christ-like? And I've been thinking about this the past couple of days. I think the answer is compassion. If we're called to wear a mask that we don't even know if it prevents any diseases around people who are living in fear, we're not called to just speak out against that fear, but we're called to meet them where they are in compassion. If that answer means wearing a mask, even if it doesn't work, who knows? Wear the mask. If the answer is to spread the gospel through live stream instead of in front of hundreds of people, the answer is to share the gospel over live stream. One of the elders in my church said something very profound recently, and it was that though we are all so far apart, the coronavirus has not shortened your arms. He said that in a prayer, and I think that's the prayer that we all need to be praying in worship and in thankfulness to our Creator. This is a time of uncertainty and fear, but our God's arms are not any shorter. And the compassion that we're required to show is not any lower. So as the church, as the universal body of believers, we speak out against fear, yes, but this compassion needs to be our ultimate tool. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ferguson, and all of our candidates on those answers. This next question, we will start with Mr. Ferguson, and we will end with Mr. DeLoglis. As the saying goes, not all readers are leaders, but all leaders are readers. With this sentiment in mind, and apart from scripture, how have your reading habits influenced your leadership style, and what books have been most influential in forming that style? Mr. Ferguson?
I have always been a reader. This year, I think I'm at 15 of books. My goal was 28. I'm almost there. But reading has been a huge part in developing my worldview. One of the most influential books I can think of is The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. If you've never read this, let me tell you one of my biggest takeaways from it. Reading about a time where socialism was on the rise during the Great Depression as an idea taught me so much about empathy for people who I don't agree with. As a leader, you're rarely surrounded by purely common-minded people as you, and it's incredibly important that you understand why people believe what they believe. Sometimes it's due to a hardship or a tragedy in their past that has driven them to a dark place. Even if that's not the answer that is most true, that's an answer that you must understand, because that's the only way you're going to truly be able to lead a body of believers or a body of unbelievers like that. It goes back to the same answer that I said previously about compassion. The answer has to be compassion, and the answer has to be empathy. Something that helped me learn that is just a little bit of reading. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Mr. Ferguson. Mr. Myers?
I honestly cannot even begin to express how thankful I am to my parents for the love of reading that they instilled inside of me. Ever since I was a younger child, me and my brothers and my younger sister have all loved to read. As of recently, I believe there are a couple areas of reading that I enjoy the most, specifically historical reading. I absolutely love a good historical book. And the way that impacts my leadership is I believe there's a power in looking back into the past. Because while it likely won't happen again, it will likely help you decide on what might happen in the future. However, beyond that, there are a lot of worldview books that I have absolutely just loved diving into. And there's one book I want to talk about specifically. It's a book that probably many of you know, a book called Love Does by Bob Goff. Honestly, not even that long of a book, but a book that I went through so quickly and I've gone through again simply because of how much I love it. Bob Goff talks in this book about the importance of not just loving and talking about how we love, but to actually enact that and live that out in every single step of our life. Once again, like I said earlier, to love like Christ loved. I believe that's what we are called as leaders to do, to love in every way, not just through our words and not just through what we say, but rather in our actions. Our actions should reflect the same love that Christ showed us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. Mr. DeLoglis?
Absolutely. So in 1 Peter 3:15, Paul commands us to be always able to give an answer to anyone who may question us about our faith. That is why I think that Evidence That Demands a Verdict by Josh McDowell has been the most impactful book of my life. In this book, this man goes through so many different reasons and ways and philosophies and theories upon how we can defend our Christian faith. And as a leader, that's the most center part and most important part, because it's not me that's leading, it's Christ that's leading through me. So I found that although there's many books and many things that have helped. First and foremost, being able to defend my faith through this book, and even more than that, being able to learn about my faith that I'm supposed to be able to defend has come very, very powerfully through this book. But after that, I've noticed that being on top of general news as a whole has been a powerful way that not only you can lead through knowledge, but you can also stay relevant and know what issues and what sides to take shape on, and encourage your friends to also side on those issues. So even things as simple as reading the daily news, Apple News is phenomenal for that. I go through that all the time. Or staying on tune with what is going on in life, I found to be major ways that I can continue being a leader through my knowledge and continue to lead through my faith.
Thank you, gentlemen. For this next question, we will begin with Mr. DeLoglis and end with Mr. Myers. Since each ticket has both a presidential and vice presidential candidate, why are you running for president specifically? And what traits qualify you for that role more than vice president? Again, we will begin with Mr. DeLoglis.
Absolutely. When Briley and I first started running, I want to throw under the bus here, I asked her to run with me and she turned me down for a solid 3 weeks. This was completely hurtful, but finally, when we came back and decided to run together, we actually weren't running with designated positions. We just knew that we felt confident that God was calling us to run together. But as we started to get to know each other better, and as we started to work at the beginning stage of this campaign, we realized that my heart definitely went towards the presidential roles, whereas her heart felt more leaning toward those vice presidential roles. Riley has done a phenomenal job at supporting me, at giving me help. Some days I feel like she's completely running the campaign and I can't think for myself because she's so good at that. But on the other side, I feel very, very driven in what this campaign needs to be. And I feel confident with the leadership skills. So we found that the balancing roles of her being able to help me with ideas, help me with the social media, encourage me and keep me going, worked out very, very well with my ability to vision in the long run and be able to plan out for how this campaign should be worked through.
Thank you so much, Mr. DeLoglis. Next, Mr. Ferguson.
If you know me at all, you know that two of my passions are math and football. Those things don't necessarily go together very often, but they've taught me some of the lessons that I think have really set me up for a role like TeenPact president. Math has taught me so much about teaching. I've spent the past year working as a tutor at my local community college in math, and as much as I get antagonized for being a huge nerd there, it has taught me so much about something that I'm incredibly passionate about, and that's teaching. Teaching has taught me so much about learning myself, but it's also showed me some really effective ways to lead as a teacher and as a guide. Now, football doesn't necessarily go very often with that, but it's taught me so much about overcoming adversity. The two have complemented each other perfectly. If you've never played football before, it's one of the hardest things I've ever done. And if you've ever run a campaign before, you know that it's a lot of work. But that adversity is not a bad thing. In fact, that adversity is one of the best things because that adversity is what refines us and develops us. As for Hannah, she's incredible at all of the things that support me in those areas. She's an incredible communicator. She connects with people that she's never met, like she's known them for years. She's a strategist. She's an organizer. And I feel like God's put us in these specific roles that complement each other very well because our personalities aren't similar, but our visions are. And that's, I think, one of the most important things and one of the things that caused us to run in the positions that we did. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ferguson. Next, we will hear from Mr. Myers.
I believe Katie worded it very eloquently last night when she said, in all honesty, the positions fell into place. I would be lying if I came up here and told you that we discussed in length on what position we would take. But rather, when people started suggesting the idea of a Myers-Patterson ticket, that was just sort of the given idea. And I can honestly say I'm beyond grateful for it. Because through the hour-long calls that Katie and I have had, we have realized that really what a ticket requires is not one person that vision casts and only one person that supports, but rather two people that come together to both vision cast and both support. I believe that is what makes a ticket come together well. And that is what makes a ticket lead well. I could stand up here for hours and tell you guys on how amazing it has been to work with Katie. She's been someone that in my hardest times during this campaign, when I just wanted to beat myself up, I could fall onto and she would support me. Someone who gave me the encouragement I needed. And as I look forward to whatever the future might hold, Katie and I recognize that in order to have a successful ticket, in order to have a ticket that leads and represents the TeenPact Nation well, we need to come together as a team and vision cast. So in all honesty, the positions fell into place. And I can tell you guys right now, I'm forever grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Myers, and all three of you. For these next several questions, we're going to be honing in on the executive order ideas that each ticket has proposed, given that all three have put forward ideas of executive orders they'd like to implement if elected. Our first executive order specific question will be going to Mr. Myers from the Myers-Patterson campaign. Mr. Myers, you have suggested in your executive order that TeenPact create an ebook devotional that would, in your own words, quote, bring the blog to its logical conclusion, end quote. Since the TeenPact elected officials blog has already put elected officials into a position where each one for the past several years has been able to write a devotional on the blog post, and these are permanently viewable on the website, what extra benefit does an ebook provide? Mr. Myers?
Thank you so much, Toby. That is an absolutely excellent question. Much like you said, and much like we said in both our video and we've said throughout the whole campaign, we believe that this executive order is something that brings the current blog to its logical conclusion. You see, Katie and I have a heart for the entire TeenPact Nation that I'll talk about more a little bit later. The heart to see the TeenPact Nation live out the heart of TeenPact, even when we don't have TeenPact events. We can't let what the heart of TeenPact is end when an event ends. It was this that influenced our executive order plan directly, which for those of you that don't know, is to start a devotional ebook called Rooted. We believe that is our job as elected officials and as a ticket to build up the TeenPact Nation and set them up excellently to live a life that magnifies Christ in every way. Currently, there is a wonderful blog put in place by previous tickets. However, that blog is just something that you can go onto and read about something written by the elected officials. It's our goal to have something interactive, to have something that extends out into your life, whether or not that's through prayers, worship songs, probing questions, and so forth. We wanted to give the TeenPact Nation something that helps you live out the heart of TeenPact, even when we don't have those events. We want to ensure that the TeenPact Nation is rooted in Christ and in the Lord's word. And the best way to do that, we saw, is through a devotional ebook. And that's why we believe that this is the best way to bring the blog to its logical conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. Now moving to Mr. Ferguson. You have suggested that TeenPacters should be creating, and as a part of that initiative, have proposed providing more freedom to students and staffers to post on the TeenPact blog. Like we've said previously, the TeenPact blog allows for members of the TeenPact student body to create content to be posted already. With this in mind, what criteria do you believe TeenPact should use to determine what is and what isn't posted on that blog? Mr. Ferguson?
The CREATE initiative is about action and accessibility. The first one is already in place to some extent. We've all been called to create since the beginning of time, and in some ways there are potential opportunities for students to add to the blog. But how accessible are they? How informed are the student body? How often can somebody submit? How likely is it that it'll ever end up on the blog in the first place? These are questions that we seek to answer with the CREATE initiative and that component of accessibility. As the elected officials curate the blog, they have to be thinking about that with discernment of what gets posted, what doesn't. Those are answers that I trust this year's coming elected officials with. I trust their discernment in what is most demonstrable to the TeenPact Nation. But ultimately, what we're looking for are things that tell the story of Christ's work in our lives, that tell the story of Christ's creative power in our lives, and tell those stories from the light of what is to come with the kingdom of heaven. Hannah and I are both incredibly excited about this opportunity, and we hope it's a call to action that becomes even more accessible through the CREATE initiative. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. Our final question on y'all's proposals will be for Mr. DeLoglis. Mr. DeLoglis, in your campaign's proposal, you've put forward the idea that the elected officials, specifically you and your running mate, were you to presumably be elected, would receive evaluation letters from each state class governor. However, given that every single student at every state class fills out an evaluation at the end of every 4-day class, what additional benefit would come from these letters that isn't already included in the evaluations the TeenPact office receives from every 4-day student? Mr. DeLoglis?
Absolutely, Toby. Thank you so much for asking that, because that is a really, really important part of our executive order. Currently, in this TeenPact structure right now, student body, state class senators, and governors have absolutely no roles long term. And Briley and I saw this as a shame, because when we go to state classes, we see that TeenPact truly does change lives, to change the world, and these classes are the means by which they so often do it. So we need to make sure that these classes are being benefited and as excellent as can possibly be. Now, it is true that students already do fill out those forms, but the issues with those is that they're not completely inclusive. Not only do the students have a limited amount of answers they can give, but they're not often asked to think deeply about it, contemplate about it, and they're usually, if they're like me, more eager about eating the sandwiches at lunchtime than they are about actually filling out the forms. Now, when a student is elected governor and senator, this will give the state class something to really think about. Instead of, is this a funny guy that will make us laugh during his inauguration speech, they'll have to think, is this a man or woman that will represent our group and really help our class flourish? And then when our elected officials reach out to this governor, they'll be able to discuss in details parts of the class that are excellent and that need to keep going, and parts of the class that aren't fantastic. And then Briley and I from there have a direct route to not only the TeenPact office, but also to each and every state coordinator. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. DeLoglis, and all three candidates. This next question will once again be to all three of you again. In the next question, we will begin with Mr. Ferguson and close with Mr. DeLoglis. Running for office puts you under increased scrutiny during the election process. There's a saying that goes, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. Why is it worth it to you to withstand the proverbial heat? Once again, we will begin with Mr. Ferguson.
I think a common misconception about scrutiny is that it's an inherently bad thing. But let's say I use a synonym for scrutiny that you're probably even more familiar with, and that's accountability. Accountability is something that is enforced in almost every Christian circle constantly. And that's because not only does it challenge us to follow Christ at the highest level and stay above reproach, but it also genuinely teaches us so much about ourselves. But why is it worth it to go through this increased accountability, this increased scrutiny, just to run for office? And I think what it comes down to is two things. One is the things that we'll learn about ourselves. And two, it's the true value of the role of representing the TeenPact Nation. We learn so much about ourselves as leaders, as people, as followers of Christ, as candidates. We learn about our strengths and our weaknesses and the things that are important to us. One of those things that is important to us, though, is representing you as the TeenPact Nation. This is something that we don't take lightly, or it wouldn't be worth it to pursue. This is something that we value at the highest level. Representation is so important to Hannah and I, and we really believe that it's worth it to go through this increased scrutiny to serve you better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. Up next, we will hear from Mr. Myers.
I agree wholeheartedly with everything Will said on how often scrutiny is looked at in a bad light. However, in my time, both in competition and elsewhere throughout my life, I've been taught a lot about constructive criticism. And I believe this can build us better as leaders, but to look at it more on the lens of the question asked, on why is it worth it? And I can give two honest opinions. First and foremost is going under, once again, what Will said, is my genuine love and heart for TeenPact. I've been involved with TeenPact for many of years, and I can easily say that it has completely changed the trajectory of my life and allowed me to make my faith my own. This drives both Katie and I to want to represent TeenPact well. But on a more practical sense, and looking back on the past couple months and running this campaign, there's been no more joy than I've had in quite a while. Being able to see all of the people that, even if it was over social media or through my phone, coming in contact with genuine people and seeing them have the joy for Christ has made this whole process, win or lose, worth it. Seeing my team start prayer chats without even me taking any steps there. talking to each other on what's going on in their lives, sharing with each other how the Lord is moving. These things have honestly made it worth it. You know, it can be hard and it's a hard process, but in the end, Jesus is with us through it all, and the whole process is worth it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Myers, for your answer. Next, we will hear from Mr. DeLoglis.
Yes, sir. The concept of increased scrutiny was one that Briley and I quite early on realized would be a future possibility. But we had to go back to the foundations of what made us want to run and why we were running. And we remembered that that is because TeenPact had been used by God as such a powerful tool to impact both of our lives, that we only felt it was right for us to serve the ministry that had served us so well and to give back to the ministry that had given us so much. So the possibility of future scrutiny seemed to be a minuscule reason for the opportunity to be able to get into office possibly and be able to help impact TeenPact through our executive order and continue this. And echoing exactly what Jake and Will said, the concept of scrutiny isn't necessarily bad. The ability to know that we'll be held accountable for negative actions is actually very reassuring for Briley and I. And in fact, we have members of our team that we specifically call and assign to say, hey, is what we did, is what we posted inappropriate? Is it appropriate? Do we need to pull back? Do we need to keep going down this road? So this whole idea of possible scrutiny or possible heat did not distract us because we saw it as another opportunity that we could be used by God and to thank God for a blessing that he's given us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. DeLoglis, and all three of you once again. We really appreciate all of those answers. Next, we will be shifting once again into individual questions for each of you. This time, specifically focusing on your policy proposals as outlined in your press releases that you sent in to TeenPact Network News prior to our event tonight, and as articulated by your vice presidential partners last night in their portion of the debate. We'll be starting with our question for Mr. Myers. Mr. Myers, in last night's vice presidential debate, your running mate, Ms. Katie Patterson, stated how America currently imports 80% of its supply of APIs, or active pharmaceutical ingredients, from China, and that your policy proposal would strive to bring that supply chain to America rather than abroad. So essentially that you wish those APIs would be produced on domestic soil instead. What policies do you believe would be most effective at achieving this goal? And do you see any harm that may fall on US citizens as a result? Mr. Myers?
Thank you very much, Toby. Once again, an absolutely excellent question. And actually, Katie and I have created a full plan that we would enact under this current situation. You see, many times the US government has tried to force current manufacturers and buyers to only buy American. However, evidence shows that that has many negative consequences. Rather, what we want to do is to give companies incentives to come back to the United States and produce domestic. And that forms itself in many different ways. First and foremost is getting FDA approval. Secondly is giving tax breaks to each company that comes back to the United States to lower their prices required. Another one is government-backed loans. These are all ways that pull on companies to come back to the United States, pulling on their patriotism to prioritize American citizens. To address the second part of the question you asked, does this have many negative consequences? While I wholeheartedly believe many policies will have consequences in some way, I believe this is the best policy under the current situation. What we have learned is that we are way too reliant on foreign trade, and specifically the country of China, for our needed medical supplies, specifically APIs, or active pharmaceutical ingredients. Rather, it's the goal of the Myers-Patterson ticket to reduce the percentage that we are relied on in China, because in the end, it is the goal and purpose of a government to protect its citizens. So under the Myers-Patterson plan, we're looking forward to the future in order to protect our citizens first and foremost. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. Just to follow up a bit on the specificity of that, could you tell me specifically how you would incentivize Chinese companies to stop making their products so attractive to the American market and rather flip the system so the American market is prioritized instead? Specifically, which policies?
Most definitely. Now, for clarification, we're not dealing with exactly Chinese companies, but rather companies that produce in China. It was back in the early 2000s, around 2001 and 2002, where major companies that produced both APIs and equipment needed moved over foreign seas, away from the United States, because in some sense, prices were cheaper over there for them to manufacture. So like I said earlier, there are 3 different ways that we want to incentivize to bring them back. Not just Chinese companies, but American companies that moved over to China. Whether or not that's government-backed loans or whether or not that is giving tax breaks to companies. It's our goal to prioritize our citizens first and foremost by preparing ourselves for whatever the future may hold. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Myers, for your answer. The next policy question that we will be asking is for Mr. Ferguson. Now, Mr. Ferguson, in the vice presidential debate, your running mate, Senator Freeland, advocated for economic globalization, which she defined as including, quote, cross-border trade, unquote. During the health and economic crisis we are currently facing, we have seen the government of our largest cross-border trade partner lie about their role in the ongoing pandemic, manipulate their currency, and censor their people in order to paint the Chinese Communist Party in a positive light. Do you believe the United States should implement any economic penalties on China, and how would you accomplish this?
So the U.S. international trade is valued currently at a $5.6 trillion industry. A common misconception is that while many of these goods are manufactured in China, that it's all coming from China. In fact, U.S. exports, the U.S. sending goods and services out to other countries, has risen by 80% over the past 20 years. And some other countries that we rely on in great quantities are South Korea, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Mexico, all countries that we've seen becoming honest with us during this time of global pandemic. One of the things that Hannah and I believe would be incredibly helpful is encouraging our relationships in trade with these other countries and taking the focus off of China specifically. Some of these specific policies that will develop this include some free trade agreements that encourage the U.S. economy to not only purchase goods from those countries, but also to send our goods to those countries. The reality of the world economy right now is that if it's American, people want it and people will buy it. This is an opportunity that we need to exploit specifically. And a great way to do it is to take the focus off of China by withdrawing some of our free trade agreements and imposing tariffs that will make it harder for them to be dishonest with us, while also emphasizing our relationships with some of these other first world countries, such as the United Kingdom and South Korea. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. Now, just to follow up with that, what steps, if any, does your globalized economic approach take to protect the American people and economy from unethical or predatory trade policies, be it by China or another nation? What steps do you take? Mr. Ferguson?
Ultimately, what some of this comes down to is the wisdom of the individual corporations themselves. The best part about the American economy is that it's not run by the government inherently. However, there is an opportunity for the government to protect us through specifically penalties on discovered violations of free trade agreements, such as NAFTA, which has since been disbanded. But the reality of our situation is that these penalties can serve as a steep discouragement to dishonest practices, but we would also encourage wisdom and discernment, in particular in translation departments, because a lot of times these dishonest practices come from losses in translation between languages, especially in countries like Korea and China. So as we seek to continue to protect our US economy and its businesses, we also need to promote wisdom and also accountability for each of these countries through these trade agreements and these enhancements of translation departments. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. We will now be moving to Mr. DeLoglis. Mr. DeLoglis, in the vice presidential debate, your running mate, Ms. Glisson, stated, quote, "Tariffs are sometimes needed, but we should limit them," end quote. Understanding that tariffs are defined as taxes on imports and exports from other countries, what tariffs do you believe are necessary, and in what ways specifically should they be limited?
Absolutely, and Briley covered this so well. Tariffs as a whole are not ideal, and in a perfect utopian world, we would love to see a completely free market. But sadly, that isn't often the case, and we currently see in a recent example with the steel tariffs and China as a whole. China does multiple practices, whether it be currency manipulation or other endeavors, to make it an uneven playing field for our trade. And upon occasion, if US small businesses are being harmed, tariffs may be needed. You see, small businesses are the foundation of American economy and livelihood, but not only that, they're also the foundation of trade. We see that 98% of all imports and exports done by the US are through these small businesses. So ideally, we want to push for no tariffs. In fact, that's one of the reasons we joined the Vision Party, because all the policies within the Vision Party are based on the long run and the long view. What policy can we implement now that will benefit us 10, 15, and 20 years from now? So ideally, 15, 20, 30 years from now, we will not have to worry about these tariffs. But in the current, whenever the schemes are unfair and US businesses cannot compete, occasionally tariffs will be needed, sadly.
Thank you, Mr. DeLoglis. As we understand it, you have remained consistent with your running mate statements last night that some tariffs are necessary. So just to follow up a bit with specificity on that, in your press release, you stated, quote, ultimately, the less barriers for companies to hurdle, the better, end quote, and went on to advocate strongly for free trade agreements. How do you reconcile those positions with advocating for some tariffs? And which tariffs themselves are barriers that are good, and which barriers are the ones that you think are actually harming America? Mr. DeLoglis?
Absolutely. I actually also just recently answered this in my last response, but ultimately, because we're in the Vision Party, our goal is the long run, and all of our policies are aimed at the long run. And like I said, in a utopian world, we would not need any tariffs or anything that ups the cost. But we see that as a whole, tariffs sometimes are used as a tool to defend the US companies through these price barriers. So one example that we can put this on is how the Chinese companies were inflating our market with Chinese steel. And because they have such low labor standards and such low costs there, it simply is cheaper to buy Chinese steel. But what happened was an administration put up tariffs, which made it so it was far more expensive to buy the Chinese steel than it was a US steel, which allowed US companies to compete. Now, as a whole, this also did add some consumer costs, but in the long run, like we're talking about, this is actually super beneficial and did help our country as a whole to compete with China.
Thank you so much, Mr. DeLoglis. Our next question is for Mr. Ferguson. Mr. Ferguson, in 2018, Amazon paid $0 in federal income taxes due to carry forward losses from years when the company was not profitable and tax credits for massive investments in research and development. Your press release called for reduced corporate taxes in order to increase employee benefits and mobilize the family unit. However, Amazon has come under intense scrutiny for its employee treatment, including high injury rates, decreasing break times, and employees getting fired without explanation. How will lower corporate taxes help anyone other than companies' wealthy owners? Mr. Ferguson?
Ultimately, what this question comes down to is the relationship between the employee and the corporation, whether that's a small company that ships internationally or a large multinational organization like Amazon. Now, as members of the Compassion Party, we seek to not only promote the efficiency of our American government, but also its well-being with regards to the family and the individual. Now, speaking of the family and individual, access to import economy has boosted the average household spending ability by about $18,000 per year in the past decade. This is yet another proof on the fact that allowing these countries to be competitive and active internationally is huge for their overall well-being. With regards to individual employees, these company policies that take advantage of them can be regulated against and can be punished. And those are policies that we would look to implement in the future. Primarily, we want to keep all of these corporations active economically because of its drastic impact on family spending capacity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. Our next question on policy is for Mr. Myers. Mr. Myers, increased globalization has been the largest catalyst for immense economic growth over the last 4 decades, lifting millions out of poverty and connecting people across the world. Globalization has survived and spread through crises such as the Gulf War, the fall of the Soviet Union, 9/11, the Iraq War, and the 2008 financial collapse. What is it that you believe makes the COVID-19 pandemic different from all of these previous crises, and that you don't think globalization is the answer here and instead are advocating for internal focus?
That is, once again, an excellent question, Toby. And I would give two responses to that. First and foremost is we have to look at the reason we have governments. It has been talked about by philosophers for decades on decades on decades, that the first and foremost reason and duty of a government is to prioritize and protect its citizens. With that said, especially coming from the Perseverance Party, as the Myers-Patterson ticket recognizes that if, as a government, we have to prioritize our citizens. The way that the COVID-19 crisis has changed this is we realize that while globalization is a good thing, we've relied on it too much. We've taken it to an extreme, specifically in the way we treat our trade with China. And honestly, we have relied on them far too much, making it so our hospitals lack the necessary things needed to fight COVID-19. To further that, I would like to clarify that our plan does not get rid of or completely disregard globalization. If you read the plan under the 15-year timeline we give, it's not our goal to completely become US dependent, because in all honesty, that would be foolish, but rather to reduce the percentage that we are relied on China, to bring it back to the United States, because it's our goal to prioritize and protect our citizens first and foremost, which is why this plan is what is necessary, especially during times like the ones we're living in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Myers. This next question will be for Mr. DeLoglis. During this crisis, the United States imported nearly $13 billion in antibiotics and pharmaceuticals, and 30% of our personal protective equipment from China last year. In your campaign press release, you state, quote, "American innovation is unmatched across the globe. As a nation, we should utilize our strengths to face challenges around the world," end quote. But also emphasize the need for free trade and international trade expansion. Do you believe we should emphasize American production or continue globalization growth? Mr. DeLoglis.
Absolutely. So this is a very, very relevant and key part of the aspect. American innovation is fascinating. Currently, we see that right now, the US consumer and the US manufacturing base is more developed and more further along made than any other industry. For example, with the facilities that make vital medicines and medication, 28% of the world's facilities and factories are in the US alone. In China, there's only 13% of these facilities. So what we've noticed and what has started to happen is the US doesn't oftentimes produce the unnecessary easy equipment or easy medication, such as ibuprofen or allergy medicines. Because that's simple. They leave that to other countries, for example, China, and Myers-Patterson actually specifically spoke about this, how we import about 90% of all of our medicines like that from other countries because they're simple to make, easy, and irrelevant. But the more important and difficult and complicated medications or producers we make inside of the US because that's harder and that is more vital to make. So as we started seeing, industries are advancing. More and more complicated scientific discoveries are being developed and produced in the US, and as a whole, that should continue happening. When we created a vaccine for malaria, we spread it to other countries and helped with that. That was American innovation that saved the world. When we created the flu shot, that was American innovation that helped the world. But for simple products, it is easy to pass them over to other countries such as China. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. DeLoglis. Our final question is for all of the candidates once again. We will begin with Mr. DeLoglis and close with Mr. Myers. The question is, what troubles you the most about your opponent's positions on international trade? We will begin with Mr. DeLoglis.
Absolutely. So one thing that we noticed this year as a whole policy topic was the different policy platforms and political platforms didn't contradict each other very often. So there's an inherent correlation between all three of our parties that stay very, very aligned. But one place of contention that we found very much was specifically with the Myers-Patterson view and the persona that they set that America is struggling to actually produce its pharmaceutical needs. Now, it is true that we bring in many, many goods, such as the ibuprofen and the allergy medicines that they mentioned in their press release. But the issue that we bring all these in isn't because we can't produce them. We can produce them better than any other country. As I previously mentioned, 28% of all of the world's facilities that produce this specific drug are in the US, whereas China only has a small 13% of these facilities. But the reason that we're bringing in all these other forms of drugs is because the cheap labor costs of China and the irrelevance and simplicity to make these doesn't demand a complicated and a scientific society. And even more than that, last year alone, the US produced its own 70% of all medical and pharmaceutical goods. And after that, they imported the rest from first Germany, then Sweden, then Ireland. So not only do we have a diverse strain, we're capable and fit to make all of our medical needs that we need if the need can come to be. So I would say the biggest contention that we had was a false persona put out through their policy release.
Mr. Myers, it seems that you have been mentioned by name, specifically in regard to your statement that APIs should not be produced overseas and that such simple drugs or drug ingredients should instead be produced at home. You have 30 seconds to defend this accusation from Mr. Galoglis.
Thank you very much, Tobin. I believe there's a major misconception that has been taken with the numbers given by Stephen Galoglis. Is first and foremost that he's discussing manufacturing companies and facilities, but not actually the entire product that is being produced. Contrary to what Steve said in his last speech, in the end, actually 80% of APIs or active pharmaceutical ingredients are produced in China, and 30% of equipment is produced in China. In the end, we are too reliant on China and need to bring it back to a domestic approach. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Myers. We will now be simply transitioning to also ask this question to Mr. Ferguson. Mr. Ferguson, what troubles you most about your opponent's position on international trade?
Thank you, Toby. And while I believe that if our U.S. economy was in the hands of Jake or Steve, I do have a couple concerns that I think need to be addressed. The first is, I believe, a misconception on what international trade really is. We've heard repeatedly discussions on the problems with our U.S. import system, the problems with all the things we're bringing in. But what about an equally important and nearly $2.5 trillion industry, which is our U.S. exports, the things that we send out to be purchased? International trade supports approximately 39 million jobs in the United States. That's almost 20% of the available jobs on the market right now. Those jobs don't come just from purchasing, buying from countries like China and South Korea. They also come from manufacturing, shipping, and ultimately making our economy more competitive and flourish greater in the world stage. The other concern I'd like to raise is one that, is something wrong?
No, that was simply a technical difficulty. You're good to continue.
Okay, thank you. The other is a concern regarding the COVID-19 crisis that we are on the way out of, and that is the difference between disaster preparedness and disaster mitigation, right? We are currently in a time of crisis, but we will not be there forever. We must be prepared for when the time comes again, but we cannot continue to live in a economic state like the disaster continues to happen. This means we should not withdraw from the international trade market. We should not withdraw from any of those things. However, we should instead simply be prepared to restrict travel, to implement social distancing again, and manage all of those things as they come in. Those are the main concerns I have with each of these respective tickets. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ferguson. At this point in time, we will now proceed to Mr. Myers for your answer to the original question itself.
Thank you very much, Chairman. To further the argumentation presented by the Galoglis campaign, I would like to further discuss the statistics on the trade between America and China when it comes to medical supply production. As I stated earlier, 30% of our actual protective gear comes from China. A whopping 80% of active pharmaceutical ingredients, the main ingredient used in nearly every single drug, comes from China. And 90% of all antibiotics produced or that comes into the United States is produced in China. These statistics point to a major problem, specifically when we were hit with the COVID-19 pandemic, that we are too reliant on foreign nations for the supplies we need. However, to further the argumentation on both tickets, I'd like to discuss what the Ferguson-Freeland campaign has put forward in regards to globalization. This was something I had the opportunity to discuss earlier. While yes, I believe globalization has a point and a place in our world, as Toby discussed, Quite simply, the goal and purpose of a government is to prioritize its citizens. I believe the situation we are in now shows perfectly how globalization is important, but yet we've taken it to an extreme. As a nation, we need to bring it back to protecting our citizens. And what that requires is bringing medical supply production back into the United States. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Myers. Now, to move on, Mr. Ferguson, your campaign was mentioned by name in some of Mr. Myers' answer to this question, so you will have 30 seconds to respond to that segment of his statement. Mr. Ferguson?
Thank you, Truman. As Jake said, globalization is a critical issue in today's economy, and the reality is that we are facing a trade deficit currently, which means that the amount of goods that we are purchasing is currently outpacing the amount of goods that we're bringing in. However, I don't believe the answer to fixing our globalization policies is to withdraw. Instead, it should be to encourage these exports. We mentioned in our press release all of the methods that we can take to encourage American companies to bring their goods to the rest of the world. This will make the trade deficit a deficit that we can recover from, rather than a permanent scar on our international economic resume. As the Chamber of Commerce said, we cannot turn our back on international trade. It is an inevitable part of the world in the 21st century. We simply need our elected leaders to prioritize initiatives to open foreign markets so that U.S. companies can sell more of our goods.
And that concludes your time to answer. Apologies for the very brief segment that each candidate does get to answer. However, that is simply the nature of the time constraints that we have here this evening. Thank you for all of your answers on those policy positions. I'm sure that has been very informational, very helpful in clarifying how each of you feel about this international trade topic. At this time, we will move into closing statements from the three of you. Each candidate will receive 2 minutes to make their final pitch to TeenPact Nation on why they believe they should be elected as TeenPact Nation's next foremost representative as a TeenPact student body president. Tonight, we will begin our closing statements with Mr. Ferguson, and we will end them with Mr. Myers. Mr. Ferguson?
Every builder, when creating something new, has to answer a fundamental question about their creation. What does it do? In Psalm 139, David says to the Lord, "I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made." You see, God doesn't just make us for the sake of making us. He makes us to do something. He calls us to create. And every gift he gives us is part of his answer to this essential question. What are we made to do? We're made to create. And while Hannah and I have shared this message with you, we've also wanted to equip you to live it out through the Create Initiative. And we dearly hope that it's something that not only inspires you, but encourages you to create in a way that glorifies your God and serves his children. But now, as we head to the polls at the end of one of the most incredible and confusing, crazy elections that TeenPact has ever seen, we have to answer this fundamental question for ourselves. What does our election do? Why is it important, and how should that influence my vote? Well, friends, I'm here to tell you I can't answer this question for you. We've talked about representation so much, but so much goes into representation, from messages to executive orders to vision for TeenPact to leadership. When you go to the polls, you're going to have to balance those things for yourselves. But I can tell you this with confidence. We're made to create. We're made to create in a way that not only glorifies our God, but serves his children. None of us are alone in this, and we believe that Hannah and I are equipped to lead you well as we each try to create together. So as you go to the polls, I hope that you remember this. We hope you're inspired to create. We hope you're equipped to do so. We hope you're confident Hannah and I will represent you well. But above all, we hope that you've seen Christ in us, and we hope that we've honored our ultimate creator. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that statement, Mr. Ferguson. At this time, we'll be moving on to hearing from Mr. DeLoglis.
Thank you so much, Toby. Again, my name is Stephen DeLoglis. You know, I've always been really good at putting on a smile. I'm really good at it, and I can do it often. In fact, when I was 15 years old, I did it so well that no one knew that I was struggling with depression and anxiety. When 15-year-old me walked into his first day class, I knew I had to keep putting that smile on. I had to keep hiding that I was struggling with depression, and I had to keep suppressing that I was crippled with anxiety. I had to do this because I knew I was broken and shattered inside, and the thought of anyone else knowing about this vulnerability, that I was broken, terrified me. I say this not to bring attention to myself, but to the ministry of TeenPact. God used that class to break into my life and show me his joy and his love. And the most amazing part about this ministry is that my story is not unique. There's thousands of other broken and shattered men and women who went into their classes struggling. But God used the TeenPact State class as a tool and an opportunity to share his love and his joy with the students. TeenPact changes lives to change the world. And as president and vice president, we have such a unique opportunity to impact this ministry through our executive order. Through the Elected Officials Communication Act, Briley and I will put in place this opportunity in this executive order. We will, for the first time, work alongside so many state senators and governors to be able to help improve and fix these state classes so it can keep more efficiently and better impacting lives to impact this amazing world we've been given. Friends, we're called to be unified as a church. This season proved to us that we're unified as a TeenPact body. And this executive order gives us an opportunity to unite as elected officials across the country. Again, my name is Stephen DeLoglis. Thank you so much for your time, and please vote for DeLoglis Glisten.
We will now be hearing from Mr. Myers. Mr. Myers?
The moth is a unique creature that uses the light of the moon for its navigation. However, often it gets distracted by other light sources, such as lamps or candles. The reality is that the moth is doing everything that it is supposed to do. It only gets distracted by lights that it thinks can fulfill. Does that sound familiar? We as the TeenPact Nation often and sometimes act similarly. We know the source of ultimate goodness, and yet so often get distracted, even by TeenPact. We fill in the blanks of our lives with things that vanish with time. Sometimes we are simply just chasing the wrong light. TeenPact is a reflection of the true one and true light, but it is not the light. There's only one name that can fill in our blanks, and his name is Jesus. The author of Hebrews says that you, O Lord, laid the foundations of the earth in the beginning. The heavens are works from your hand. They will perish, but you will remain. From the very beginning, Katie and I have recognized the reality that often we as leaders find it easy to rely on ministries for our spiritual filling. TeenPact is a vessel for the kingdom and has allowed me to get to know him more intimately. However, even TeenPact is not designed to keep us full all year. It can equip us, as it has done excellently, but the truth is it cannot forever fill us. Our vision for the entire TeenPact Nation is to see us all live out the heart of TeenPact, even when we don't have TeenPact events. It is our prayer that the TeenPact Nation does not stop the mission of this ministry at the end of an event. Let's represent the ministry of TeenPact well by representing the eternal kingdom well. Let's turn away from relying on experiences and towards relying on what is eternal. The call, it's simple. The answer is rich. Fill in your blank. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here this evening, gentlemen. And thank you everyone for tuning in. Tonight has been extremely informational and I believe helpful for the voters at home. You all have done an excellent job.
Yes, and what I'm about to say, I say as both an anchor for TeenPact Network News and also simply as a fellow member of TeenPact. I'm genuinely proud of all of you guys and the campaigns that you have run and your statements tonight. Each of you has both shined the light of Jesus and also simply been very articulate. I know that is going to be very helpful for the voters, and the question that they have to answer tonight when the polls open is not going to be an easy one to answer.
With that, it's about to be decision time across the TeenPact Nation. Over the next several hours and tomorrow, voters across this great nation will cast their ballots for who they want to represent them in office. Voters, think carefully and vote with certainty, confidence, and conviction.
To cast your vote, just click the link that is on your screen right now, or you can go to @TeenPact Network News on Instagram. Click the link in the bio of that page, and you will also get a voting link in the list that will come up then as well. Voting will be open directly after the conclusion of this broadcast, and you will need your voter identification code when you vote, which you can find in your voter registration confirmation email. or by logging into your registration account at teenpact.com. Use your confirmation number for your registration as your voter ID. So on the registration form in your email, it will say confirmation number. That is your voter ID. You have until 10 p.m. Eastern Time on Wednesday, May 27th to cast your vote. Do not neglect to make your voice heard.
And be sure to watch election returns during virtual National Convention Friday night. You can sign up for virtual NatCon at teenpactnatcon.com.
With that, we are all but finished here at TPN headquarters in balmy Richmond, Virginia. Stay informed, stay tuned, and please don't forget to vote.
Once again, we're your hosts, Truman Forehand
and Toby Forehand.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, TeenPact Nation.
Bye, everyone.